Welcome to the Rock is George podcast. I'm your host, George Dionne. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to hit like, follow, or subscribe on the platform that you're listening to us on. You can also check out my work at the loudest.com on the planet, knac.com, for exclusive hard rock and heavy metal interviews, live show coverage, album reviews, and more. My guest for episode 195 is AUDRA MARIEL. She fronts a unique music project called Martin Howth. The latest album by Martin Howth is Distant Dissonance. It was released on April 19th through Nefarious Industries. And here's AUDRA MARIEL to tell you more about it. If I knew absolutely nothing about Martin Howth, how would you describe the music to me?
It's not my favorite when people describe it as acapella, although I understand that that's essentially what it is. But I don't want it to sound like an a cappella group. So it is entirely comprised of vocal tracks, vocalizations. It shouldn't sound like a cappella music, so I won't categorize it that way. People are turned off by that also. I find a cappella, unless you're like really into an a cappella group, people are like, oh, a cappella, blah. So I don't like categorizing it that way. So I would say it is an exploration of using the voice as an instrument.
That's fair enough. So one thing you do have to clear up for me is that Martin Howth is really a project of one, and you are AUDRA MARIEL. So why the distinction between the two?
So when I first started looping or experimenting with writing and looping and layering, I had been singing jazz for about 10 years at that point using my name, which is AUDRA MARIEL. And I wanted to make the distinction between the projects because they're so vastly different. I mean, singing jazz standards is not at all like layering and looping vocals in kind of a sort of experimental way. It's not like way out. Like the songs are written, they have lyrics, there's structure. It's not. I've heard some experimental vocal projects. I don't know if I would categorize it as that either. So, but it's certainly not jazz. So I didn't want there to be confusion. So I was going to call it heart in mouth, because to have one's heart in one's mouth is to be like terribly nervous or like feeling your heart in your throat, which is how I felt when I first started doing this. I felt much more comfortable singing with a band. If I made a mistake, I could hide pretty easily. If I make a mistake doing this, it can ruin everything. And I felt a lot of that pressure when I first started. So instead of calling it heart and mouth, someone gave me the idea to create like a spoonerism where you swap the first two letters of the words. But I would convince myself that if I spelled Howth, Houth, that people would struggle with pronouncing it. They would go Houth, or so I was like, make it so simple, Howth. So Martin Howth was born, and it's like it's a person's name, and I'm a person, and I thought that's great, that works. Yeah, that's why.
So let's talk a little bit about the vocalizing over vocal loops kind of thing that goes on with Martin Howth. You use a looping station. I've heard this done before. Bobby McFerrin comes to mind, and I know Marco Mendoza of Rock Guy, he does it from time to time as well. So how does it all work when you're recording something like this?
I do it all live. I don't ever use pre-recorded tracks. The loop station I use is an RC505, a Boss RC505. It has other capabilities, like there's effects and different things that you can use. The most I'll ever do is maybe put a touch of reverb on my voice in a live performance. There were no effects used at all in recording the album. You can also plug in other pedals and things and use other effects. But the idea of this project was to utilize only the looping effect and to really explore how to use one's own voice in different ways, how it sounds different when it resonates in different parts of your body. If something's resonating more here versus here, it sounds different. The first EP that I released, I experimented a bit with more than once, I think, with singing on an inhale instead of an exhale, because it created like a more hollow sound. It almost like sounded like wooden to me if I was playing like on a recorder. I was trying to use what I had to create varied sound. So that was like the purpose of it. So when I do it, I don't utilize any of the effects that are available to me. I think the only thing I do to manipulate my voice, without doing that myself, is I sing into a cup, which this was the first cup I sang into, and it cracked because I carry it in my suitcase. So now I keep it on a shelf, but I had bought two from the same thrift. So this was the original cup, and you can create, depending on where the cup is, create different sounds. I mean, it is kind of like one effect, but that's the only thing that I do that isn't internal, I guess, to alter the sound. Ooh. Yeah.
So the mint green suitcase, I feel like this has a significance. It houses your equipment, but I feel like there's a little story to it.
So the story behind the suitcase is, it's probably not the way that I acquired it is not super interesting. A friend of mine was I think he was going to the Golden Nugget flea market in Frenchtown, New Jersey, because I had recommended it as a place where he could sell his things. And he was having me like help him catalog the things he was selling. And I saw the suitcase and I was like, can I buy this from you? He's like, you can have it. And I took it home, and it was when I first started this project. And again, I was terrified, and I needed something to carry this piece of equipment around. And I realized that, well, if I carried it around in this thing and it fit perfectly inside of it, I could also just flip it open and play out of the suitcase and have this buffer in front of me. And at the time, I also wasn't standing up. I was sitting on the ground, which is, for vocalists, it's really not good to be sitting and hunched and do it. So I did that for maybe the first year, and then eventually like stood on my feet and I was like, wow, this is so much easier to do. But everything still remained in the suitcase. And I have my mug in there. I'm very superstitious. So I keep all of my set lists that I write on postcards, mostly vintage postcards, but it doesn't have to be, like, I'm not that stuck up about it. They're on postcards, and I keep them in a stack, and I don't take any of them out. I just the stack keeps growing as I keep playing shows, and I keep them in there. And like anything else I need, I think when I started, I didn't have a mic stand, which was, this was just so silly. I was holding the mic. And so when I needed to hit buttons and things, sometimes I couldn't get like super close. So I took a chopstick and I wrapped it in shreds of t-shirt. And sometimes I would hold the mic. Sometimes I'd be holding the mic and the mug in one hand, and I would have to hit buttons. So I would use the chopstick to do it. And I don't use it anymore, but it still lives in the suitcase because it's like part of the whole experience. So it's always in there. It never comes out. It's just something I need to do. People have said you should show people what you're doing, and I'm like, nah. I like being in here.
Your latest album is Distant Dissonance. It comes out on April 19th through Nefarious Industries. Sort of not just unique in the voice looping and vocals over the voice looping, kind of unique in the areas and places that you recorded this. You went to George Court University campus in New Jersey and the historic Strauss Mansion Museum in New Jersey to kind of get the sound you were looking for from kind of these old buildings. But what was it in particular that enticed you to these particular places?
Well, also the idea of doing it all, these are all live recordings. Obviously, we did it. I won't say tracked it. I didn't track it. I recorded like live takes in each space, because the first album I did, I had tracked it and we had looped everything. Myself and the engineer, working with the engineer, had done this manually, and listening back to it didn't sound, this is always performed live. It didn't sound like, it was beautiful. He did a beautiful job, but it wasn't there's something not quite right. So I knew I wanted to do live takes for this album, which is an endeavor and an exercise in, abandoning this idea of perfection that a lot of us have during the recording process, because that doesn't exist. But these spaces, I had done a lot of work at the Strauss Mansion Museum. I used to host a concert series there, and I had such an affinity for the place. And I ended up recording half the album there, which is really just one house. It was like a summer home, the Strauss summer home. And then I had met a friend who is a professor at Georgian Court University, my friend Marcy Maserato, who is professor of like film and media studies. And she got me into all of these spaces at Georgian Court. Now, Georgian Court was once the Gould estate. So it's a lot of different buildings on a piece of property. So I had an opportunity, whereas at Strauss Mansion, I was recording in different rooms in the house. At Georgian Court, I was recording in like wild places, like a swimming pool, a bowling alley, a tennis court, a ballroom, a chapel, like, and all of these really different sounding spaces. The Strauss, I would say the spaces were subtly different in the way that they sounded, for sure. And I chose a lot of the spaces there for more, for other reasons, like, yes, how they sounded, but also how it connected to the song, or symbolically what it meant to me in relation to the song. I feel like a lot of what happened at Georgian Court, some of that came into play. This idea of like, what is this song about and where am I recording it? It was more so about this space sounds appropriate for this. Whereas the differences in sound at Strauss Mansion, because it's in the same building, were subtle. And it was way more about, this feels right to do this here, so I'm going to do it here, in the stairwell, things like that.
Did I read maybe one of these buildings or rooms are haunted?
Oh, the Strauss, yeah. I years ago directed, when I was hosting a concert series there, my friend Mike Flannery, who actually mixed and mastered this album, he engineered the album. He was someone that I invited to do a concert there because he is also a musician. And he was like, I think I'm going to write a rock opera. And will you help me cast it and direct it? I have a theater background. And I was like, yeah, great. So for this, like, it's just a monthly concert series, I ended up working with Mike and directing his rock opera that was about zombies. His concert was in October, and he based it on a ghost story that was, I think like Disney bought the rights to it at this point. So I don't even know if I'm allowed to talk about it. I might like end up dead in the morning. I don't know. Well, it's not that serious. But so when I was directing the rock opera, I had key to the mansion. I remember letting myself in and trying to set the room for the rehearsal. And there was on the wall, no one else was around, but someone, it wasn't like pipes. It wasn't the house settling. It was a knock, knock, knock on the wall. And it was like 10 minutes before anyone else had arrived. And I said, oh my gosh. But the Historical Society there, actually, there's like a few of them who are ghost enthusiasts, and they do like paranormal stuff after hours there themselves. So they would say that, yes, the space is haunted. But I experienced it myself. I think it happened and I was like, all right. And I walked out and I waited for someone else to get there. And I always thank them when I record, really in any space. I'm always like, thank you for letting me be here, because there's history there. There's energy there. I don't know what you believe or don't believe, but I always say thank you upon arrival and upon exiting. I'm like, thank you.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your latest single, Viva Moon Vegas. What was the lyrical inspiration for that one?
So it's sort of about, it kind of questions the idea of a soulmate, whether or not that exists. And there's I don't know if you've heard this story of Aristophanes at Plato's Symposium talking about the origins of love. So Aristophanes said that what, like, before there was love, I guess, or the origins of love and why it exists among humans, is that human beings used to be like double beings, that there would be, I guess they were like back to back, and they would move through the world by like cartwheeling around, and they were these like supremely powerful beings. And I'm totally bastardizing this, by the way, and you should probably, if you're actually interested, read about it, because my version is going to be terrible. So they're cartwheeling around and whatever, and they still pay tribute to the gods, but I guess they as beings had become so powerful that they had gotten close to the heavens, and the gods were like, oh, no, we can't have that. So they were thinking about like killing them all, and then they were like, well, but they still pay tribute to us, so we're not going to kill them. We're just going to sever them in half so that it will put them in this weakened state. They will no longer be these powerful beings, and they'll spend their lives roaming the earth searching for their other half. And so it's about so Viva in Vegas is sort of speaks to this idea of like these two people that haven't found each other on this plane of existence, but they both independently of one another will look up at the moon and wonder if and think that, well, maybe somewhere else I've met my soulmate, like on this other plane of existence, and we became so powerful that we could do anything, and we populated the moon. And we populated the moon so successfully that there's so much light pollution on the moon that we can see it from Earth. And I'm looking at the moon right now, and I know that I'm up there somewhere, like having a great time. And that's sort of like, it's totally absurd, but it's like this story that a character in the song, or both characters in the song, kind of tell themselves, I guess, to find comfort in their loneliness. And that's sort of what it's about. But it's this idea. So the line is like, what if it's not a reflection? Like, what if it's not reflecting light from the sun? What if it's creating its own light? And what if I've created the light with my soulmate? Basically.
That's pretty deep.
It's pretty, I guess, or like silly. I don't know. When I think about it, I'm like, that's so silly, and it doesn't explain the phases of the moon. But I guess it doesn't need to, because it's really just a story that people are telling themselves. It doesn't have to. It's not like a real folktale, I guess. I don't know. That's weird.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about the first single you released from the album, Dear Doreen? It's kind of a letter to yourself, but didn't really start out that way.
I bought actually a Golden Nugget. Wow, I'm totally plugging the Golden Nugget flea market in Frenchtown, New Jersey. Or no, Lambertville. It's in Lambertville. I was at the flea market, and I picked up an autograph book, and I opened it to a random page, and it just said, paddle your own canoe. And I guess at that point I was questioning a lot of things. I think I was first starting to do this, and I probably started crying like it was some message for me. And I was like, I'm buying this book. And it was maybe $3. And then I flipped through it, and I learned so much about this young girl named Doreen. She was in like maybe middle school, elementary school from 1940 to 1945, I want to say. And, or was it, maybe it was 1940. I don't remember, 41 to 45, I guess like 4 years. Anyway, it was a lot of like rhyming couplets and things and people writing to her. But if I flipped through the whole book, it was over the course of years. You learned about her story, and people would write things like, when you get married and you have twins, don't come to me for safety pins. And then they would sign it. A common like signature at the end would be, or I don't know if that's a salutation, I don't know how you would categorize that, would be, I'm yours till you tear out this page. And a lot of what people were writing, so they would write these little rhyming pieces, couplets. They would tell her, always remember your boyfriend. Everybody kept talking about this boy, Teddy, over the course of years. But there was not a single page from Teddy in the book. And there were pages that were very deliberately torn out. And I was like, oh, she had a falling out with her beau and like she tore out his pages. And there was, I think it was on that, something about getting married. It could have been the one about when you get married, you have twins. There was a lot about getting married. Like a lot of these rhymes had to do with getting married, kissing boys, like a lot of stuff like that. She had, I remember the page was written in pencil, and she or somebody, but presumably she, went back in ink and underlined when you get married. Just underline the phrase when you get married. And you're talking about like a little girl. And I felt for her. Like I just read through it and I fleshed out the story. I do a background in theater. I read through it and fleshed out her story, and I felt for her. I'm like, there's so much pressure on you to tick all these boxes and to do all these things, but pay attention to the page that says paddle your own canoe. Like that's the part that you should listen to. So I sat down to write it to her, but of course it ended up being something that I wrote to myself, because I see so much of myself in this entity that I've like I've created a character out of her. I don't know what she was actually like, or how much of what I've fleshed out is actually true. But so it ended up being a letter to me, but it started out being a letter to her. Yeah.
One of the songs I enjoyed on the album was Magic House. It's more of a spoken word piece, but you go a little beyond voice looping. You looped in some cicadas in there and some cats, kind of a cute little effect, but probably not easy to capture all that live.
No, so well, that was the only track on the album that utilized pre-recorded tracks. I have to say, I have never in my life utilized anything pre-recorded. And the reason that I did it then was because I think it's the first track that comes up on that piece is a track that my cat, Lucien had, I call him Lucien when he's in trouble and Lucien, like when he's being, I don't know, both. He's both things. He had recorded himself. He walked across the loop station meowing. And so the track is him meowing and then me going, oh, and then stopping the track. And it, once something loops, it creates its own rhythm. And so I was so excited that I had his voice on there that I improvised some tracks to play around with it. And I saved that on the loop station and decided I had been writing this poem about this house, the house that I'm in. And I decided to include it on the album. And I was going to loop the song, to loop the poem, or at least recite the poem live and bring all the, oh, here's another cat. This is the other cat that's featured on the track. So what ended up happening instead was when I was fine-tuning the poem, I often do this. I will make voice memos of things and listen back to see what works and what doesn't. And I was reading it to that cat who was laying belly up on my bed. And I was just sitting there casually reading it to him and recording it on my phone. And, giving him belly kisses, and you hear him purring through the whole thing. And I was going to re-record it. And I was kind of like, nah, I'm just going to use this. And I'm just going to live mix everything over this. So that's what that track is. It is a poem. It is the only thing that uses anything pre-recorded, and it really all is pre-recorded. It was all recorded here in the Magic House, which felt appropriate. And it's sort of like live mixed. I did multiple takes of that, like mixing it all live.
You have some fantastic artwork that complements the vinyl version perfectly. The collage is by Corinne Henn, and you have additional artwork by Damon Santamaria. How did you get those two involved in crafting the album artwork?
I don't know. They're dear friends of mine. Corinne actually did the cover of my first EP, the Wayward Warbler EP. She's an incredible collage artist, and I was thrilled that she let me use this piece for this album cover. And I've said to her and of her that if I haven't run out of things to say, she will perpetually be the person I ask to do my artwork, because the music is sort of a collage. So it feels appropriate to utilize that as the artwork. And I so adore her work. Damon Santamaria is another dear friend of mine, a true Renaissance being who is a very prolific writer, musician himself, and a visual artist. And he helped me with like the back cover. He helped me with text. He does graphic design, and he designed the center labels based on conversations we had about the content on the album, what he had heard, etc. So yeah, they're just my dear friends, and I don't know, I asked them, and they very graciously agreed to contribute.
The album's being released through Nefarious Industries, which is quite the interesting boutique label, to say the least. How did you end up signing with them?
So friends. Well, actually, Greg at Nefarious had heard me play years ago in a gallery space, and that was the first time I met him. And when I was starting to work on getting this album out there, I had released the first single and the video myself. And I was submitting things on like Submit Hub to try to get people to review it or add it to a playlist. And I was running into a lot of trouble, especially because of that acapella categorization that people like are terrified to touch. And I was telling another dear friend of mine, Rolando Alvarado, who's a wonderful musician himself. We're in another project together, like a Twin Peaks tribute band, which is a lot of fun. But I was just confiding in him that I was having such a hard time and I didn't know what I was going to do. And he's like, have you sent anything to Nefarious? So Ro, I guess with a couple of other musician friends, started that label with Greg. And now Greg runs the label. And Ro was like, I'm going to mention it to him. And he had mentioned AUDRA MARIEL. He's like, my friend Audra has this project, and Greg had no idea who I was until Rose started describing what the music was. And Greg was like, oh, you mean Martin Howth? I saw her at this gallery like years ago. Yes. Like, put us in touch. So, and then speaking to him, it's just, he's super great about, this is what I'm going to guide you to do, but whatever feels right to you is what you should be doing. And, it's been really cool to work with him and to work with the label. It's been super helpful. The things that I struggle with the most, like promotional stuff, I'm not, they're really helpful with that. So it's great. I don't have to worry about, submitting to people and how do I categorize and are you going to care? And because a lot of the feedback I was getting is, this is great, but this isn't what we do, and I didn't know what to do with that. So they've been really helpful in just spreading it around and getting it in people's ears, which is all I ask.
So when it comes to performing live, I assume that you record your loops just before the song starts and then you go.
No, I record it all as it's happening. It all unfolds. The way these are written is that I start it and that's the beginning of the song. And so sometimes I'm recording all the loops as like an intro, and it works as an intro, and then I start the lyrics. But sometimes I only need like one or two layers, and then I can start in with the lyrics and start capturing loops throughout the song that will then come back. It's more often that than it is I lay them all out at the beginning. It's mostly that I'll lay a couple down, start the first verse, and then keep layering as I go.
So I would think that, each performance at whichever show you're at could possibly be just slightly different from the one before it, because a little hard to nail the exact same loop every single time.
Yeah. I do my best, but it ends up being, I guess, slightly different. But there's that, I have a theater background where everything's happening for the first time every time. And each time you perform is an opportunity. It's just an opportunity, It's an opportunity to get it closer. When I was in the theater, I would always think of this metaphor of like skipping stones. So as an actor, it would be about connecting to the material. And sometimes you could like skip a couple times and it would plummet, maybe you could bring it back. but there would be nights where you just felt like you were gliding right across the water. And it feels like that with this as well. I look at it the same way, because it's each time is an opportunity to just make contact. And if I can get, like, it's going to get as close to perfect as I could get it, you know, in the moment. And there's some sacrifices that you have to make. Sometimes I'm not willing to make the sacrifice. Sometimes I'll lay something down and I'm like, nope. And then the audience just, like, they're usually they give me a lot of grace. I have to say that people kind of appreciate when you're like, I hated that and I'm not going to make you sit through it, so we're going to do it over. But it's part of the experience. It's, I don't know. I guess that's why my foundation is what it is, because I sometimes get self-conscious that I don't have a strong music foundation, that I didn't really study that much. I didn't really study music formally. I had whatever vocal training I had in college, you know, as part of a theater BFA. But I wouldn't trade it, because I think it gave me a different foundation that I utilize for this kind of performing. And I think it's really appropriate.
I used to be in a cover band, and I had a theory that as long as the audience thought that you believed in your performance, didn't matter how you did.
My mom used to tell me that when I was a kid and starting to perform in like plays and things. She was like, they won't care if your voice cracks, as long as you feel it. They won't care. They'll forgive you as long as you're feeling it in a real way. I'm like, and I've carried that with me always. It feels better when you feel it too. You don't want to phone it in. Like, what's the point?
Right. And they'll know if you don't believe in it, they'll be like, meh.
They will. They'll check out. Especially when your songs are like 8 minutes long. Oh my God. Can you imagine? They stop listening.
You had a LP release party recently at the Navesink Library. Is that how it's pronounced?
There's probably a debate. Some people say Navesink and some people say Navesink. So I guess both are correct. Well, although I bet there are people that would argue it. I say Navesink, but I actually don't know if that's correct. So you actually might be more right than I am. But yes.
How did it go?
It was wonderful. It was more wonderful than I could have imagined. People were so receptive and kind. It's a beautiful space and an historic space, which felt appropriate. I played in front of a wall of books, and they happened to have, so it's not a functioning library. It's more of like an historic space, an event space, a community space. And my friend Dickie Cox came and did projections for the live show. And it's this whole wall of books, but half of the books, the bottom half, are all facing paper side out. So it provided this lighter surface for him to project onto. But it's all segmented by the bodies of the books. So it was created such a cool effect. I cannot wait to see it was filmed. And I cannot wait to see how it looked, because what I saw, I was like, oh, this was really, really, really cool. But it was beautiful, and folks came. I was worried about that they came. There was like standing room. We had food. My dear sweet friend Barbara Foreman made food for everybody, and we celebrated after. It was like, it's what I like. I'm Italian and German, but my Italian is like, eat, like, now we eat, like, afterwards. So there was food, and it was great. It was I'm still kind of reeling from it, and it was Saturday and it's Tuesday.
You have a couple of shows coming up. You got one in May at the Rahway Library and one in June at the Asbury Underground at Art 629 Gallery. Are you sticking with local performances as far as your material goes, or are you looking to kind of like branch out a little bit outside of New Jersey at some point?
I would love to branch out. I have historically branched out. I don't have anything scheduled right now. There's talks about, there's another artist, Chiara Ascura, who's on Nefarious. We're talking about kind of teaming up and she's maybe going to come east because she's West Coast, and then maybe I'll go west. But that wouldn't be for another few months. So I might venture outside the state of New Jersey. Right now, those are the shows that I've got planned for the spring, but maybe in the summer months, I'll go anywhere where they'll have me. So if you know anyone, let me know, because I'm very portable. I just have this suitcase.
It's a long way from New Jersey to Massachusetts.
Oh, it's drivable. We could do it.
So you did mention that you had another project that was a Twin Peaks cover band. What exactly what's the set list on a Twin Peaks cover band?
Oh, so it's compositions by Angela Badalamenti, and all the Julie Cruz stuff. There's a 9 Inch Nails song in there. Sycamore Trees is in there, the dream sequence song. Are we 9 people? I want to say it's a 9-piece band. Dickie also does projections for that, so he might be one of the 9 people that I'm including in the 9 people. But it's everybody's, except myself and the other vocalist, everybody is a multi-instrumentalist. There's theremin, there's saw, that's all Cody McCory. There's like 3 bassists in the band, and they all trade who's playing bass. There's 2 percussionists. I mean, it's wild. It is so fun. We're called the Ghostwood Orchestra. So if you're into Twin Peaks, you should follow us. We're on the socials.
Do you work in any other projects?
So I have jazz projects, yes. My band is called A Real Human Jazz Band, or AUDRA MARIEL and A Real Human Jazz Band. And I get hired out as a jazz vocalist. I work with a few different bands and ensembles. I released an album recently with my friend Anthony Fuscaldo, who's a guitarist based out of Bayonne. We met in Jersey City volunteering in Journal Square. So we released an album that we called Journal Square. And he's someone I work with. I'm really, really fortunate. My dear friend and mentor, Gary Mazarapi, who's a fabulous bassist, introduced me to Frank Vignola in my early 20s. Frank Vignola is a wonderful jazz guitarist, fantastic, marvelous, world-renowned jazz guitarist. So I get to play with him sometimes, which is a dream. It's very, very strange. It's eclectic. The musical endeavors are quite eclectic. I've got a project with 2 friends that is more experimental called Time Out Time Owl. We've got a show coming up in June where we're all kind of looping, but they're playing different stringed instruments, and I'm just doing like more experimental vocal things. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you keep them busy, and those are all the questions I have for you, Audra. And I'm glad you could take the time to speak with me today. The new Martin Howth album, Distant Dissidence, is out April 19th on Nefarious Industries. Great album, and I'm glad that we got to speak about it today.
Thank you so much for chatting with me about it. I appreciate it.
Once again, I want to thank AUDRA MARIEL of Martin Howth for coming on the Rock is George podcast. Be sure to check out her latest release, Distant Dissonance, out now through Nefarious Industries. Head over to your favorite music streaming platform. Take a listen to what's available. If you like what you hear, buy a physical copy. Support the artist. For all things Martin Howth, head over to the official website, martinhowth.com. I also want to thank David Brenner at Earsplit PR and Nefarious Industries for making this interview possible. You've been great. I've been George Dionne. Discover your next favorite artist on the Rock is George podcast.